for different schemes in the electrical case. As for the natural gas case, I think it's important to keep in mind that currently there are 3 gasoducts which are connected with the United States. And what I mentioned about the growing imports of natural gas in Mexico. This is something about how the price is regulated. I'm going to skip this. After these changes and the efficiency of the docks in Mexico, under the new planning, some projects have been approved for gasoducts to have a stronger system to distribute gas in the country and to be able to get a supply in the electrical, all industrial, commercial, and residential sectors, eliminating the bottlenecks. And also this new infrastructure will increase the natural gas supply and a reliable and safe with competitive prices. This is the actual gasoduct system in Mexico, and there's an indicative plan for the next couple of years. After that, there will be a huge methodology as to how to expand that gasoduct system. Here we see the systems that are being tendered or auctioned and will start operation in the next couple of years. And they will reinforce the integration with the United States and give the possibility for a new expansion in Central America. So the proposal of natural gas supply in Southeast Mexico and Central America is something that has been discussed since the end of the 90s. If did the same study done with the IAEE, there have been 2 new studies. There was a visit by President Obama to Central America and a summit with the leaders to promote the natural gas supply to the region. And the idea was that the principle in Mexico is that first we have to supply the country and then we can export. So as a part of this expansion of gasoducts, after that we would generate 1 to South America, initially to Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. A couple of weeks ago, the president signed an agreement to work on this project. Obviously, in terms of electricity, there will be a dynamization. This is the graph that I was mentioning as to what the Mexican electric market would look like. This is the electrical system in Mexico. It is a grid, and it has some weaknesses and some transportation weaknesses. It's 400 kV. We also see, it's interesting to see, even though with a small amount of transactions, there are 10 interconnections which are existent with the United States. Some of them are synchronous, the other one is asynchronous. Mexico also has interconnection with Belize and an interconnection with Guatemala. Obviously, this new regulatory scheme in Mexico will allow for new options for transactions with the neighboring countries. Part we would expect competitive prices derived from the natural gas issue. Another important thing is the commitments that Mexico has made in terms of renewable energies and climate changes. In 2008, Mexico approved a new framework for renewable energies. In 2011, I think Mexico was the second country in the world to approve a law for climate changes. There are very clear percentages about the increment of renewable energy, and especially there's a firm decision to move forward in that development. There's a system of carbon credits in the new law, so everything would indicate that that situation that they had in terms of renewable energies will be overcome. Obviously, there will be an excess of a surplus of energy in Mexico, which would allow for better trade with the United States and also with the Central American countries. And under these schemes that we visualize, there has not been a discussion about what that expansion will look like in terms of electricity to Central America, but I believe that's one of the pending topics to be discussed, what those new schemes would imply. And that's where we see the advantage of having and to progress in the institutions. Central America already has their rules in place, and I believe Central America is a model, a role model as for what Mexico is doing, and not the other way around. There's a very complicated issue about the interconnection, electrical interconnection, and as you know, partly because this is a longitudinal system, because of the sizes and centers of the systems, the oscillations problem has been very complicated, and we have not been able to have all the interconnections operating 24 hours. Apparently, the solution that would be given the definite long-term and mid-term solutions would be asynchronous connections. So the question is the design for that scheming. Who will be paying for that interconnection? It should be done based on the Central American expansion rules for the regional network, right? But for conclusions, I believe a general conclusion of the integration that I think is aligned with what we have been discussing here is that in the context of energy, and particularly in the electrical sector, despite the existence of a broad consensus about the huge benefits that it contributes, the progress in the energy integration, the results that we have got are not still meeting the expectations. So we have that feeling that we have said a lot, but results are not enough to have access to all the benefits that we are convinced we can have. Second, in order to analyze the integration process, it's necessary to contextualize them in the framework of an integration and regional program, global process, and the predominant ideologic paradigms, all the pendulum that was mentioned earlier by my colleague from Brazil. That's a good illustration. And the other thing, and this is my recommendation, that maybe if it is a big problem, it is very complex, so maybe I should divide it into smaller, less complex problems. So in that case, we could see sub-regions with their specific characteristics, their specific speeds, etc., so that the sub-regions can progress in a better way, maybe for South America, Mercosur, etc., and then we can have a global integration. And obviously Brazil, the big power, has a big role to play in that strategy. In the case of Mexico, we have to understand it's a very complex element, but there's a transition period. We cannot see results overnight. A transition could take approximately 5 years, but there will be new schemes in order to cooperate and integrate both natural gas and electricity and petroleum. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges for the energy integration agendas, for the regional integration institutions, and also these are challenging issues for these technical congresses such as this one of the ELAEE, which we will most possibly keep discussing in the next companies. That was my message. Thank you very much.
Our two panelists for their excellent presentations. So now we open the session for questions. Abrimos la sesión para preguntas para los que quieran hacerle alguna pregunta a nuestra.
So anyone who wants to ask any questions to our panelists, please go ahead. We have microphones. So please raise your hand if you have a question so that you can get a microphone.
Myself.
Si se paran, se introducen y...
Please stand up and introduce yourselves.
I'm from Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. When I see several examples about transmission lines between two countries or interconnection between two countries, and I see hydroelectric plants into two countries or pipeline between two countries. And I see several agreements, cooperation agreements. For me, it's not integration. It's not a cooperation. And maybe it isn't integration in the South American and Latin American. And my question is, what's the opinion of the speakers about the cooperation and integration? We are talking about integration, or we are talking about agreements, or the needs of the energetic plan from two countries only? I want to hear about the speaker, please. Thank you.
Estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el comentario.
I completely agree with your comment. Most of the binational countries could be considered cooperations and complementarities, where there is a lifetime, and that's where when that complementarity expires, and the question is what comes after that. That's why I put an emphasis in that. Maybe the only exception that comes out of that context is the electrical market in Central America, where they did agree first on what they wanted, where they wanted to get in the long term, the principles. They designed the market, they built the first phase of the project. They are just inaugurating it, and they're just beginning to speak about an expansion, and they're also discussing in this fundamental period, which is the one, those new institutions, supranational institutions are consolidated. It's difficult for a national agent to think, why do I have to do what someone else in another country is telling me? But if it's some agent from the market, they have to follow those commitments according to that regulation. It's obviously difficult for a country to say, okay, if I have my own legislation, why do I have to obey another regime, or why do I have to another court in Central America, or an instance which is in Central America? So it's about understanding that the regional market has unique rules for that region. So that's the fundamental phase, and there are many pending topics in this process. In this case, we're talking about the regional processes and about the concept of the seventh market, which is a part of the new market, which is expanding, and in the future it should be a unique market. So there's a lot of challenges, but I do agree that the majority of these are binational cooperation and complementarity projects.
I think that there is no possibility of energy integration without an overall integration of the economies in the region. So Europe didn't finish its energy integration, but it has already one currency, the euro. So in order to, you can start with the energy, but with cooperation, okay, not integration, as you said, but this is the first step. But in order to reach important convergence on a regulatory framework, you need also to have a convergence on macroeconomic policies. You need to have a conversion on monetary policies. So that's a problem that we had in Mercosur, for example. Mercosur has improved, advanced fast during the 90s. Lots of cooperation have been approved, not only on energy, but in other issues too. But then we lost these advancements, these improvements with the Argentinian crisis, and Argentina went to a very different way from Brazil in terms of macroeconomic policies, in terms of regulation, and then the possibility to advance in energy integration was lost. So I think that we have to start by bilateral cooperation and reducing the problem of improving the trust between the countries, and then we will need to wait until we have broader cooperation, broader economic integration in sub-regions like Mercosur or Andean countries community, in order to go further with the energy integration.
There's another question there?
Más que una pregunta, Rubén Chaer de Uruguay, más que una pregunta, yo quería...
Rubén Chaer from Uruguay, more than a question. I wanted to make a contribution. You said that we're coming up to an era of pragmatism, and I think that we need to look that within the context of whether it's integration or cooperation. One example, how are we going to reach something that's integrated and then tell Brazil don't build a pro-infra? To be able to think about something that is the foundation of every economy, which is energy, going to reach such a level of integration that countries lose the possibility of creating their own energy policies. With the countries we have, with the political pendulums we have, I think that this is unreal. We need to focus on realities. I think that what we need to look for was we have to include intelligence, and maybe the people who are here are the ones who will manage to do something. We need to say that Latin America's integration model has to be something that will allow us to all be different and still to exchange. And this can't be too difficult because the Phoenicians sold glass to the rest of the Mediterranean. They were very different kinds of people. There was everything at that time. So what we haven't known how to exploit is go down to something so simple, that independently of the pendulum going one way to another, that those who carry out operation within the system, which isn't the political system that changes every 4 or 5 years, can attack it. We need to have such a simple rule at the top that we don't really need to create something that's supernatural. I don't want to create, I'm against creating more institutionality.
Okay, of integration, respecting our difference is the key challenge for Latin America. So there is another question. Peter, you have one question. There was one in the back. Yeah. There's a lady there.
I guess I have a sort of a comment and a question. Another example you could talk about with integration is the ASEAN countries. In particular, one of those I was interested in is Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia with their gas. So there's been this dream to create strong interconnection, single gas pipeline. Singapore already has connections actually with Indonesia and Malaysia, but one thing that the Singaporeans are really concerned about is the heavy subsidies of energy use in Indonesia and Malaysia. So they actually went down the road of putting in more LNG imports rather than increase. So I guess the question is, to what extent are different policies towards subsidies of energy use an impediment in Latin America to greater energy cooperation? And then in respect to the Central American electricity example, how harmonious were the policies in the different countries that built this new electricity transmission line, trying to run the same kind of regulatory structure and so on? Do you have the same kind of approach to subsidies, or is that an issue?
Okay, so energy subsidies and their impact on integration. Can you make a comment on that?
There is a huge impact on integration in our region because since you have this different types of subsidies and price controls in the countries, the only way that we have to make contracts, to make bilateral trade, is to make long-term contracts. And when you make the long-term contract, you fix the price, and then the government will find a way to make this gas or electricity to be sold. So Argentina, they sell gas for a very cheap price, at least they used to, but they used to buy gas at market price from Bolivia. So they would take expensive gas from Bolivia, mixed with very cheap price from Argentina, make a mixed price and roll over. But this is a problem. I mean, you cannot have a trade integration, so a real integration, like Renato has mentioned, when governments interfere in a very violent way. Interference you're going to have always, but in a very violent way, controlling the prices. So the uncertainty that you bring for investments would make it very, very difficult for companies to invest in Bolivia or invest in Brazil and then think to sell it for Argentina, for example. But that's why I think the bilateral cooperation, where you're going to negotiate the specific trade, is the only way now that we have to go forward.
Sí, el tema de...
Yes, the issue of subsidies in the Central American case has been complicated. In the case of renewables, in all the countries, there's fiscal incentives for renewables. Obviously, no country wants an investor to use those incentives for exports to other countries, and then a false idea. The countries say, let's export expensive energy, but the cheap energy, which is renewable, needs to stay here in the country. And there's a fallacy in that kind of reasoning. In Central America, we've emphasized what's called regulatory interfaces. This is a system in which the regional market interacts with 6 different regulatory systems, and that's why regulatory interfaces were created and approved, which are currently being tested. And with regional distribution, its vocation is regional, and transactions need to be made between regional entities, and so there has to be a system that will be equitable based on the transmission right system, and that are implemented by the first auctions, and that's how transmission is going to be paid for. The idea would be that in the future, those mechanisms will be adopted by countries, but it's one of the most complex issues, since some countries still aren't very clear on how to finance their national distribution systems. And if they aren't clear on that, then far less are they going to have an idea of how to finance regional distributional.
We run out of time, so...
Okay, a quick and short question. Thank you very much for 2 enlightening presentations. It was said at the beginning by the chair that one of the main challenges is universal access to energy, to electricity. And I wanted to ask the 2 panelists or if you have any thought about how integration, regional integration, may advance universal access, if at all, or the other way, may not help. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
One of the fundamental points and the topic of integration is that although the first integration agreements were commercial, they've usually evolved towards agreements with greater scope that have very clear social objectives. The case of the Central American integration principles, the urban topic has a very important role to play in the case of the ALCA. So there are topics that were left out, like, for example, mobility, worker mobility, and this is a topic that's being discussed. Migratory issues are a fundamental topic. In the case of the Central America electrical interconnection, one of the main key points was that the benefits of this integration must reach the entire population, and this is far, far from being met. And so in our office, we are working on one of the sustainable energy goals for all, which is to achieve access to energy for all, and we're working on that in Santiago and in Mexico. And we're looking at the number of people who depend on wood for cooking, and also in the south for heating. We talked about subsistence energy consumption, but this is a topic that can be discussed to be able to have a common basis on which to compare. Latin America has lesser challenges than Asia or Africa, but it's still a very important topic. Anyway, just a compliment. I believe that the question of universalization is directly linked to integration in the following way. In Latin America, private investment in the energy sector is growing. The role of private investment is larger and larger in our region, and integration between countries creates a better environment for investment than a context with no integration. One has to invest in each country, following the rules of each country and following rules that change very quickly and are very unstable. So energy integration contributes in an important manner to stabilize the rules of the game. And this facilitates the attracting private investment. Right now, this is relevant. In the 50s, it wasn't, because it was all government-owned companies. But another issue that I think is important is the costs. Integration allows taking advantage complementary nature of countries that have different natural resources. So as complementary nature brings down the costs, then the prices will come down, and this will help with a universal access to energy.
Two distinguished speakers, and I invite you to stay because we have the closing ceremony, so we retire and somebody else will be here with you. Thank you very much.
Now we are going to start the closing conference, inviting to the stage the President of LADE, Marisa León, Vice President of LADE, Isaac Diner, and Edmar Dalema, who will do the closing of the 5th meeting, Latin American meeting of energy economics, and will give you the welcome of the 6th meeting of energy economy in Latin America. Well, I know we all want to close this conference, But I just want to thank you first and thank Isaac and his team for putting together this event with such success. So to each one of them, thank you very much. I also want to thank the sponsors, the International Association for Energy Economics. And very important, I want to thank all the professionals who came here and dedicated 2.5 days to debate about these topics that we are all interested in. All I have left to say is that after having shared these 2 days and to participating in these very enlightening conferences from LAC, we doubled of that, and that adventure or journey that in around 2008, some of us here decided to start in Bahia. We now believe that the only thing I'm going to ask each one of you is to speak about what we are doing, because we really believe, and every day I believe more and more, that this is an important mission that we all have, this mission of knowledge, and to open these spaces of knowledge and discussions in Latin America. So this is the contribution that we all can make. We will be waiting for you in Rio 2017. We'll see all of you. In the meanwhile, we will be communicating with each other because of the many activities that we will have in the meanwhile. I'd like to announce, it was announced already, but I'd like to announce and explain to you there has been a decision that the new Congress will be done in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And the Energy Economics Group, myself and the group will lead the organization of this seminar. And we hope it will be a big success. Just like this was, Isaac set a very high bar for the Rio seminar. He organized a high quality event in terms of technical, scientific topics, and it was very pleasant for all of us to be here in Medellin. And I would like to say that this will be the first time, truly, that this ELAEE is organized in Rio, in Brazil, because the launching of the idea for the organization was done in 2008 in Salvador de Bahia during an event which was a small event where we invited colleagues from several countries in Latin America, but there were no paper presentations, and so the students were not able to participate in this event. So it was a launching event of this idea to reactivate the Latin American energy community. And now we are going to truly have the first event in Rio. The majority of you here have been to Rio. I am very excited about this event. But to light your appetite, I'm going to show you a short video, and then I will let Isaac speak to you.
foresta, e tutto questo nel centro di una città. Questa città è pazzesca.
would say you too felt saudade. So come back, because Rio awaits you with open arms.
Well,
Quisiera decir que
conference in Rio with one condition, that everything that you saw here, you can't do during the conference, okay? You can do it before or just after it. Otherwise, it won't work. So now that I think that you are all convinced to come to Rio, I would just want to say that it's very important, your help in this endeavor. I mean, it's important not only to come to Rio, but help us to get people to come to Rio. And we would like to do a Rio International Conference with much more presence of Latin Americans. We don't want to do it a Brazilian conference. So I invite everybody that has been here to help us to promote the conference, to be in touch with us, indicating people to be invited. And I think that we can really do a very, very interesting and very good conference. So thank you for your attention.
And to finish, I will tell a couple of words. I want to thank all of you for attending this event. Many of you came from countries which are very far away, such as China, from Europe, from the United States, from Brazil. And you have been very excited about this, and that's the way we have taken it. The organizing team has worked very hard and has been able to have everything working. Now, the words to thank you specifically, we will have them in a little bit, but before that, I would like to say something. This event that we are closing today, we have the goal to expand the community. All of us who are here, I would advise you to travel to Rio. We just saw the images, but
I don't think Edmar is telling us the truth in terms of the program. I think the program will be very innovative, and we will have a combination not only before and after the conference. We will be able to enjoy Rio, but during the conference he would be, I'm trying to convince him that we would have conferences sometime between 4 and 8 o'clock in the evening for over 2 weeks, so we can cover all topics. But in the middle, in the meantime, we can enjoy Rio, because Rio is a great, great, great city. So for all of you, thank you very much, and we hope to see you again in Rio, but anytime. Medellin and Colombia would be open for you. The last words of would be from a companion.
Yes. The fifth Latin American meeting of energy, perspectives of energy in Latin America and the Caribbean, challenges, limitations, and opportunities. On behalf of the President, Dr. Isaac Diner, wants to thank all the attendees for their participation. And also, we want to thank the International Energy Economics Association, IAEE, their President Peter Hadler, and the Executive Director, David Williams, and the Latin American Association of Energy Economies, LAC, for allowing Colombia to be the host country of such an important event, and for their support in the organization and development of this event. Likewise, we want to thank EPM and the CN Center for sponsoring this event, and also Terpel, HMV Ingenieros, Endesco, Isa Canarsas, the Faculty of Finance of the National University of Medellin, and University Jorge Tadeo Lozano for their sponsorship. We want to thank the valuable participation of international experts, academics, political leaders, and business people for sharing their analysis on Latin American actuality and for presenting their vision in energy and global tendencies. We want to thank Marisa León, Gerardo Rabinovich, Ricardo Raineri, and Edmar Almeida for their support to the organizational committee for this event. And to thank all of you and congratulate the president of this event, Dr. Isaac Wiener, the manager, Laura Cardener, and the organizing committee, conformed by Mostica Castañeda, Maritza Jiménez, Sebastián Zapata, Stephanie Garcés, Johnny Valencia, and Manuela Zapata for their work in the organization and development of this successful event. We want to ask for a big round of applause. Finally, we want to thank the logistics group Lago Eventos, all the students of the National University of Colombia in Medellin, and everyone else who supported and made possible the success of this meeting. Once again, a round of applause for everybody. We want to remind you that your certificate will be emailed to you shortly. Have a nice afternoon.